This video is about tissues and skin. Think back to the levels of organization. Atoms make up molecules. That's chemistry. Molecules make up organelles and cells. That's all about cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. Skin is the body's largest organ. Let's look at some of the tissues that make up the human body. There's four major tissue types. The first that we'll look at is epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue covers and lines. It covers body surfaces, it lines body cavities. We can classify epithelial tissue into two major categories, simple and stratified. Simple epithelial tissue just means the cells are in one single layer. Stratified means they're in multiple layers. If you take a look at the diagram, on the one side is simple epithelial tissue. That's this side here. The other side is stratified epithelial tissue, where the cells are in layers. After we look at the layers, we can look at the shape of the cells. If the cells are squished, that's squamous. If they're long columns, like tall columns, that's columnar or columnar. If they're cube-shaped, that's cuboidal. So to identify epithelial tissue, we say things like it's simple cuboidal epithelium. It's stratified columnar epithelium. The second major category is connective tissue. Connective tissue does just that. It connects, it holds your body together. Connective tissue is divided into proper and specialized. This side is proper connective tissue. This is specialized. Proper connective tissue is classified as loose or dense. So adipose tissue is loose connective tissue. Adipose tissue stores fat molecules. Dense connective tissue are things like tendons and ligaments. The lower picture, dense connective tissue. The top frame is showing areolar connective tissue, a very common connective tissue throughout the body. Specialized connective tissue, think of it like liquid, semi-solid, and solid. Blood would be liquid. Semi-solid would be cartilage, and solid is bone. So that's specialized connective tissue. Bone, cartilage, and blood. Cartilage is the stuff that makes up your ear or your nose. It's hard to imagine blood is a tissue, but remember that blood consists of red blood cells and white blood cells. So more than one cell is required to make a tissue. Cartilage, you'll notice that the matrix, which is this protein gel in between the cells, is very pronounced. So all of connective tissue has cells that are somehow suspended in a matrix. It's not often that the cells actually touch each other or that they're bonded together like they would be in, let's say, epithelial tissue, where the cells are united together. Epithelial tissue always consists of the tissue lining and then a basement membrane, some kind of undergirding membrane. Another tissue type is muscular tissue. Three main types of muscle tissue. There is the voluntary skeletal muscle tissue, that's striated, that's the top picture. The middle picture is cardiac muscle tissue. It's also striated. It has these striations in it, kind of stripes in it. But its features are that it's branched and that it's involuntary. Smooth muscle tissue, you can't see those striations. But smooth muscle tissue is found on internal organs. Muscle tissue is unique in that it has the ability to contract. The last tissue type is nervous tissue. The two cells that make up nervous tissue are the neurons, which transmit and send information like nerve signals, and the glial cells or neuroglial cells. which help to support and protect the neurons. We can find nervous tissue in places like your brain and spinal cord. Human body organs are in body cavities. The two major body cavities are the dorsal cavity and the ventral cavity. The dorsal cavity is completely surrounded by bone. It consists of your skull and your spinal cord. The ventral cavity in the front, not every cavity in the ventral cavity is surrounded by bones. Your lungs and heart are in your thoracic cavity, but your abdominal cavity doesn't have bones to protect it. The thoracic cavity is divided by the diaphragm. It's the diaphragm, the muscle that you contract that helps you inhale. Your thoracic cavity is divided into several segments. The pleural cavity contains the lungs. The pericardial cavity contains the heart. Here's a list of the 11 human body systems. We're going to look at the first body system, the integumentary system, which consists mostly of skin, hair, nails, things like that. Here are some of the jobs or functions of skin. Protection, prevents water loss, regulates your body's temperature, helps synthesize vitamin D, sensing the environment, and getting rid of some waste products. Here's a diagram of a cross-section of skin. You'll notice that it consists of an epidermis, that's the top layer, a dermis, that's the middle layer, and the hypodermis, that's the lower layer. You'll notice that the dermis layer is very thick and that there's a lot of structures in the dermis layer that you don't find in the epidermis layer. The epidermis layer is primarily dead skin cells, so there's no sensation there, but it does create kind of a waterproofing layer. The dermis layer, where it meets the epidermis layer, you'll notice that there's ridges there. Those ridges are what makes things like fingerprints and what makes those fingerprints unique. The dermis layer has blood vessels, nerves. That's where the oil and sweat glands are embedded. The hair follicles are embedded into the dermis layer. It's a very thick layer. It's vascular. So if you get a sunburn and you start to peel the outer skin layer, well, you don't really feel it because those skin cells are dead. If you get a tattoo, on the other hand, that needle poking into the dermis layer, you do feel that because there's nerve endings there. If you're shaving and you nick yourself shaving and it starts to bleed a lot, it's because you've cut into the dermis layer. That's where all the blood vessels are. The epidermis layer are, the bottom layer is where we have some living cells, and as they fill with keratin, this protein, they are pushed to the surface so that the outer surface is this waterproofing layer. And it keeps, as those cells die, they fall off and we lose those layers of skin. So the epidermis is constantly being replaced, but the dermis layer is not. That's why getting tattoo ink into the dermis layer makes that tattoo semi-permanent. The lowest layer is the hypodermis layer. That's where we store the adipose tissue, fat, which is really good for insulation, cushioning, thermoregulation. It's also where those slightly larger blood vessels are located. So if you get a shot or a vaccination, that needle goes into the hypodermis. It's a hypodermic needle. There are several things that affect skin color. One of the things that affects skin color is blood. You might notice that when you're really hot, you turn red or embarrassed. You turn red in the face. There's two different kinds of melanocytes. Melanin-producing cells. Cyte means cell. There's a yellow-red, which gives off those pigment proteins. There's a black-brown, which secrete those colors of pigments. Your DNA is going to determine just how productive your melanocytes are. So some might have really dark skin and dark complexion. It's because their melanocytes are producing lots of that melanin. Others might be very pale or fair complexion, and that's because the melanocytes aren't producing nearly as much of that pigment. Tanning is your body's way of protecting itself against ultraviolet radiation. The production of the melanocytes increases to block that ultraviolet radiation from getting into your cells and causing skin cancer. One of your body's defenses is for those cells, when they're burned, to just die and peel off. That's why once you get a bad sunburn, your skin peels. Here you can see where the melanocytes are located, at the bottom of the epidermis layer, and they're producing the protein pigment melanin. If you have marks on your skin that are darkly tinted because of melanin, it might be an indication of melanoma or skin cancer. Things to look for are moles or marks that are asymmetrical, where the borders are rough and jagged, where the colors are more than one tone, or they're large, greater than a 1/4 inch in diameter. Melanoma is not the only type of skin cancer. There's also basal cell carcinoma, which is that bottom layer of the epidermis, basal cells, the basement layer, the bottom layer, and squamous cell carcinoma. Squamous cell, remember, that's the squished epithelial tissue. It's when those cells become cancerous. Cancer just means uncontrolled cell division. Here you can see some of those different types of cancers and why they're significant. The reason melanoma is significant is because those cancer cells can get into the bloodstream and be transported to other parts of the body where the cancer will metastasize, where it's being transported to somewhere else and that cancer grows in some other organ. Hair covers the body almost completely, except for places like the lips or the tongue. There's hair almost everywhere in the body. Hair consists of the shaft and the follicle. The follicle is the part that's helping the hair grow. The shaft is a part of the hair we comb or cut. You'll notice the sebaceous gland, this oil gland, it helps to keep the hair pliable, movable, without being like brittle or breaking easily. The root of the hair is the bottom part of the hair where the hair is growing. Hair helps us sense things. Like we can sense things crawling on our skin sometimes because they move hair. It also creates a layer of warmth around the body. Nails consist of dead cells, like hair. There's no feeling, there's no nerve endings, and the cells themselves are filled with protein. That's what gives the hair its color and its texture. Same thing with your fingernails. Those are cells that are just filled with a type of protein to create this hard layer that kind of protects your fingertips from sensing too much, like from sensory overload. Glands are also all over the body, but there's two different types of glands. There's sweat glands and oil glands. And then there's two different types of sweat glands. Sweat glands help thermoregulate. As you sweat and that sweat evaporates, that helps keep your body cool. Oil glands keep your skin and hair pliable. That means bendable, flexible, as opposed to rigid. The two types of sweat glands are eccrine glands and apocrine glands. Eccrine glands you find most places on the body, including your palms and soles of your feet. Apocrine glands, those are sweat glands you typically find in your axillary region, like your armpit and your groin. Body systems help maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis just means keeping the internal environment the same. Anytime there's an imbalance, that's picked up by a receptor. Normally those are your senses. The receptor then sends a message to your brain. Normally that's the control center. The control center sends a message to an effector, a muscle or gland, to correct whatever the imbalance is. For example, if you're cold, your thermoreceptors will pick up that change in temperature, send a message to the hypothalamus of your brain, which sends a message to your muscles to start shivering, and that warms your body up. If you get too hot, that's picked up by thermoreceptors, sent to the hypothalamus of your brain, the control center, which sends a message to your glands to release sweat and some muscles to dilate so that blood can move to the surface of your skin and get rid of a lot of that excess heat. Sometimes we get an injury, the skin heals, we never know it's there. Other times it leaves a scar. Scarring is often because the injury goes perpendicular to these contour lines found in our skin. It's kind of like a grain to your skin. So if the injury cuts across the lines, typically that will result in a scar. Calluses and corns result from rubbing on the skin, which increases the production of skin cells, epidermis. So that epidermis begins to get thicker. As it gets thicker, those dead skin cells accumulate. We call those calluses, or if they're on joints, we typically call them corns. Signs of inflammation include redness, swelling, heat, pain. If we get an injury, a lot of times our skin responds by turning red because of the increased blood flow, swelling to sort of quarantine or isolate the area of injury. This is an example of some wound healing where a scar might form. You'll notice that the scar is unpigmented. There's no melanin in scar tissue, which is why it leaves this kind of off-color pigmentation. Sometimes burns can be more serious than just sunburns, but any kind of burn is categorized by degrees. A first-degree burn is categorized by the redness, second-degree burn because of blistering, and a third-degree burn because of blackness. First-degree burns typically only affect the epidermis. Second-degree burns also affect the dermis layer, and a third-degree burn affects the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. Interestingly, a second-degree burn is the most painful of the burns. Third-degree burns are the most serious, but the reason they're not painful is because all the nerve endings have been burnt and are destroyed. We can estimate how much of a person's body is burnt by using something called the rule of nines. If we take your body and divide it into different areas, each of those represent 9% of your body. So for example, your whole head is 9% of your body. The front of your chest is 9% of your body. An arm is 9% of your body. So that if you had a burn that covered your entire arm and your entire leg, it would be 9% for your arm and then 18% for your leg. A total of 27% of your body would be burnt. Hopefully that helps you understand a little bit about tissue, skin, homeostasis, and how your skin helps to maintain your body's homeostasis.